Hi everybody, Joe Cioffi on this Tuesday. Hope you had a great day. I was looking at the weather across the country and it's hard to find much going on except right along the coast of the Pacific Northwest and in a couple of areas in the northern Great Lakes in northern Michigan. There's a little stripe of showers there. There's a little patch of showers on the Texas-Oklahoma panhandle, and that's pretty much it. It's as quiet as it can be this time of year. We've made that notation for the last several days, and it continues. So we just have weak weather systems to deal with. We're going to look at a couple of things tonight with regards to the longer term, because I'm trying to get a grasp of what's happening and why it's happening. Nothing's really changed from what we spoke about yesterday. The blocking pattern is going to shift, and we are going to see a turn to colder weather in the east. It's going to take another week. So at this time next week, we will have it, pretty much getting ready to be front and center as we make the transition over. Probably around Wednesday of next week, I think, will be the day. And there are questions with regards to when all this happens. Once it does, are we going to get just cold, or is there going to be some precipitation to deal with? Are we going to get into a bit of a stormier pattern with all of this blocking going on? And that really remains to be seen. We have a lot of confusion. We continue to see weather models shifting back and forth in figuring out the strength of the block, or the position of the block, how strong does it develop, how far north does it develop, how far west does it get, et cetera, et cetera. So we keep getting these model swings of high volatility after about the 5th or 6th day, and then those swings get even wider as you move your way out to day 9 and 10. You usually have volatility in the models when you go out that far, and that's expected, but the volatility here has been exceptional, and then we seem to be flipping back and forth on all this. So let's take a look at what I would call the teleconnections. I'm going to pull up this chart, and these indices basically measure the oscillations of pressure in the Atlantic and in the Pacific. Okay, and I'm going to focus on the three that I think are front and center with regards to with what's going on. The first is the one on the upper right, which is the NAO index. Okay, and what this basically measures on this chart is 0 being neutral. It goes generally on a range of -200 to +200. When you have higher than normal pressures in the North Atlantic, the index goes negative. And that's what you see here, running from, now this is yesterday's. They didn't have an updated one for today's. I'm just going to assume that today's is going to be pretty much close to this. But you'll notice that the North Atlantic oscillation is down at the very, very bottom of its range at -200. So this is a very, very strong signal that is being sent. The atmosphere in the North Atlantic is about as opposite as you would see it, with the pressures high and the jet stream displaced further to the south. Now, the one thing I would point out is that you see that the NAO, as we like to call it, runs up toward neutral by the time we get to December 11th. Now, sometimes when you have the indexes in strong negative positions and in a strong negative reading, and then it runs rapidly up towards 0 to neutral, which would be less blocking, that oftentimes can be indicative of a storm signal. So we're going to want to pay a little bit of attention here to this sort of December 9th to 11th time frame. The other two factors to look at is what's called the Pacific North America Index. And that basically measures the change in pressure in the Pacific Northwest and on up into the northeastern part of the Pacific Ocean. When this is strongly positive, that's telling us that there's a big upper air ridge in the west. And when we have big ridges in the west, we have very deep troughs and a lot of energy in the east. So Combine this with the NAO, and I would say that that December 9th to 11th time frame is something we may want to pay attention to. And the third index that we watch is the East Pacific Oscillation, which is basically the North Atlantic Oscillation, except that it's in the Eastern Pacific. And here too, when it goes negative, this is usually points to colder weather in the eastern part of the United States, particularly when it's coupled with that positive PNA index. Now, of all the three indexes, I think in order of importance in terms of the weather overall, and not necessarily in this particular situation, the NAO in this situation is important. But in terms of those of you who are fans of wintertime weather, I think that we should, I want to point out that the index that you really should pay the most attention to, I believe, is the EPO, the East Pacific Oscillation, and the PNA, the Pacific North America pattern. I think those two really are front and center, the two indices that you want to look at more importantly than the North Atlantic Oscillation or the blocking. I have said this many times. I had an opportunity to say this again to one of my friends and former colleagues today, that the NAO is vastly overrated and overstated as a winter weather impact. Yes, it's important. Yes, it does play a big factor in cold and snow, but there are other ways, and the NAO doesn't, I think, is probably the least of the three indices that's important when it comes to wintertime weather. I think the negative EPO might be far more important than the negative NAO. But that's just my opinion, and I think there'll be some people that might disagree with that, but I firmly believe that the NAO is vastly overstated. But no matter, that's what we're dealing with, and we're dealing with a super strong NAO, and as a result, we are going to continue to see this trend eventually toward a colder pattern, but it's going to take another week for this to work out. In the meantime, if you look across the United States going into Wednesday and into Wednesday evening, it's about as quiet as it can get. And we're going to see temperatures in my neck of the woods on Long Island in New Jersey. We're going to see readings up close to and over the 60-degree mark in some places, but it's a one-day affair. We've been getting these sort of one-day bump-ups, and then it cools down again, and that's going to indeed be the case as another high builds in for Thursday. You see it here up in northern New England. There'll be a northeast to east wind, so that's going to hold temperatures down on Thursday. A weak weather front comes through with some showers Thursday night into later Thursday night into early Friday morning. Much of the plains, the Midwest, the northern plains, the Rockies, very quiet. The extreme northern Rockies getting into some snow as another system comes in off the Pacific Northwest. And then as we move on to Friday, we'll get rid of these showers by late morning. I think that it's probably a little bit overdone. Another high builds in with another shot of, let's call it, cool air for Saturday. Then we have a bit of energy that swings into the east for Sunday, perhaps producing some clouds, but I don't think it'll do much more than that. Meanwhile, out in the west, we've got some snows moving into Oregon, Northern California, and into Washington as a little bit of colder Arctic air starts to bleed down a little bit into the northwest, with a trough swinging out of the western states. And then you start to see here in the east. Now here we're going into Tuesday. This is when we begin to see colder air starting to pour down into Minnesota, the Dakotas, and in the northern lakes. And as a result, there's quite a bit of overrunning precip that sets up from the Ohio Valley back down southwestward into North Texas and New Mexico. Now, assuming that at this point we're at going into day 8, so we may still see this part of the pattern adjust a bit, but the overall trend on the late afternoon GFS model run, as we move into later Wednesday and Thursday and into Friday and then the weekend of December 9th and 10th, it is going to be cold. Now, the models don't really pick up on this idea of the 9th, 10th, or 11th until you start to see a wave that comes out of the Gulf. You can see it here on the GFS. We're now into the end of day 11. So it does pick up on something. It doesn't really do much with it because it takes it out east-northeast, but there is energy that comes down from the north. And I'm going to show you the upper air in just a second because it looks like this whole upper low on this run drops down. That may or may not be correct. And it still stays cold right through the end of the forecast period. As we move now at this point, we would be almost to the middle part of December. So what's happening in the upper air with all of this that's driving it? Well, why don't we see how much of the upper air is in on the new GFS so I won't have to go to the old one. And I want to try and look at the North America view. And we don't have all of it, but what's the last one we have? 102 hours. Okay, so we're going to have to we're not going to be able to use that one today, so we're going to use the US one. There's a little bit of a delay in some of the data coming in this evening, so why don't we start with the present time. So let me get to right now, and you can see a pretty normalized jet stream pattern across the US from west to east, and as we move along, you're going to see this weak system that comes through tomorrow. You can barely find it. If you look back now, approaching the western Great Lakes, you've got the system that's going to move through on Thursday night, Friday morning. A bit of a trough there. You see that little V shape that forms once it moves offshore. Then you've got a second trough that shapes up for Sunday from just south of James Bay into Ohio. You can see it there, but also starts to strengthen a little bit when it gets to the coast, and that's going to probably cause low pressure to develop south and east of Cape Cod and then move on out. And you see it there, that upper low that kind of forms and then drops southeastward and moves eastward. And then we have the beginnings as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday. You start to see the gradual strengthening of this jet that comes down out of Canada across the Great Lakes and into the mid-Atlantic states. That's all the cold air. There's also some energy in the southwest that's swinging down into Mexico. And you can see how dominant this upper trough. You see how that upper low is just basically moving almost west-southwestward here? Let me just back it up. But you'll see it. We don't have it to the wide enough view to look at the upper air across Canada. But maybe the North Atlantic view will give us something a picture of this. But this is the block literally forcing the vortex to drop south and eastward. It gets pretty far south here and then translates toward the east coast. This is December 11th. We're going to have to watch this very, very closely, this idea. This is where the models are creating that, that storm signal that I showed you with respect to the indices. And notice that once that pulls out, the GFS follows it with another strong trough at the end of the period. Now, granted, that's going to change in terms of scope and magnitude, but the model seems to be at least reacting to the blocking. And now we actually do have the North Atlantic view, so we'll be able to see it from this perspective. And you'll also be able to see, you've got England here on the far right side here, and you've got Ireland as well. So why don't we back up from the beginning, and you can watch that blocking high. You see it out there in the eastern Atlantic, and it's going to start. This is why at the moment we're not cold here in the east, because the block is east-based, okay, as it sits east of England. So they're getting those northerly winds there across Europe. And I'll switch to the Europe upper air in a second. But watch, across North America from what we can see. You see how the block then suddenly starts to build westward into southern Greenland? So now the blocking high becomes west-based, and it pushes, as it builds northwestward, it forces the vortex going east-west like that. And, we have a low that's out in the Atlantic that's basically creating the log jam here to prevent things from moving in their normal west to east pattern. This, it's been a long time. You probably have to go to the winters of 9, 10, or 10, 11 to see a pattern like this, because the last 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, yeah, so the last 5 winters, the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, has been absent for much of the time, and even when it did appear, but it would only appear for a brief period for a couple of days before disappearing. But this is very dynamic here on this run, at least on the GFS. And as we get moving through the end of the period, you still have some semblance of higher than normal pressures up in the Atlantic, which is forcing the jet stream to be further south of normal. So for those of you who are winter weather lovers and snow lovers, you should be certainly encouraged by this particular model run. We could take a look at the European, by the way, and the European is a little, both these models tend to diverge after about the 5th or 6th day. The European gets to the same idea, but it does it a bit differently as it swings a trough down into, this is late next week now, it has a sharp trough that's swinging into the east. It gets colder, and as a result, it does try to bring a wave out of the Western Gulf and then taking it northeast from there. So it kind of has the same idea. The GFS and the European models are, they're different in some respects, but they share the commonality of the block exercising flexing its muscle and forcing the cold air and the jet to be displaced further south. So I think, with both models, and even the Canadian, which I'm not going to show you, even the Canadian model pretty much is the same idea. There isn't a lot of difference there as well. Now, look at the upper air. We're going to look at Europe and take a look at what's happening here, because, one of the things that I noticed was earlier, I want to see if it carries through the same fashion. I'm going to shrink this a little bit. And by the way, I did managed to speak to somebody briefly today that explained to me with regards to the northerlies, as they call them, that blow cold air down from the Arctic, cold moist air, and then you start to get what basically is kind of like lake effect or streamers that move into England. And this is, it's kind of interesting. I didn't realize that they have that happens in that fashion, almost like lake effect snows. But if you look at this upper air, there's a low center here sitting in just north of Germany, the upper low, so the winds are counterclockwise. So you've got northerly winds in the upper atmosphere blowing from the Arctic, east of Greenland and Iceland, over England, into France and Spain, and then across into Italy and beyond. So this is a very, very cold flow, and it stays with them. This is this week, by the way. This is happening as we, right now. And that upper low really drives southward into the Mediterranean Sea. Eventually, though, as the block begins to shift, I only have, unfortunately, out to 102 hours, but as the block begins to shift from here, I'll jump back one run so we can go a little further. When the block goes from being an east-based block to a west-based block, suddenly the door is open for weather systems to start coming in from the west and southwest, and you start to see some big Atlantic systems that would start to move to the northeast, and this is going past the day 8 time frame. So when we get to day 8 and we see our change here in the east, you're going to go to Europe, and they're going to change in the other direction because they're going to lose the east-based block. But in the meantime, you can see those patchy areas of snow, and there are those streamers by the indication of the model picking up on that cold air moving over the warm waters of the North Sea and bringing some snows to the coasts of England and Scotland. And you see it there, some of the blue shading that's just inland. That's that, basically North Sea effect or ocean effect going on, much like what happens in Cape Cod and sometimes happens over Long Island during the winter months. So you get a little bit of ocean effect snows. But looks like a storm for the Mediterranean here in day 4. So this is Saturday, bringing some heavy snows over parts of northern Italy, and that eventually just kind of weakens. But you certainly have a cold pattern until, again, once we get past the 7th and 8th day, then that when that block begins to break down, you start to get those storms to come up from the southwest, and you see those two powerhouses, one that moves up into northwesternmost Europe over Sweden and Finland, and Norway, and then you have another big low that's approaching Ireland, and this is again way down the road once the block shifts toward the eastern part to the west and shifts over toward western Greenland, the Davis Strait, and then on up into northeastern Canada. So I think this is very interesting. It's certainly going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out over time. I mentioned yesterday that I'm kind of thinking that once this pattern does shift, that we are going to have an opportunity for snow somewhere for somebody. We'll see over time how that plays out, but certainly those indices are kind of flashing a little bit of a storm signal for that time frame, as I mentioned, probably around December 9th to the 11th. And by the way, storm signals come and go. We see them, people, I see them quote them a lot. I usually don't want to do that until I kind of feel strongly, see some stronger evidence. So I thought there was enough out there today. I mentioned it yesterday, but I'm thinking to take a slightly stronger stand on this today. And I did write about it on my website, meteorologistjoecioffi.com. If you want to go in a little more in depth, you can take a look over there. Now, let me say a big hello to everybody here. As I see we've got folks on the board. I'm going to start with Ricky Della Riva, who may not still be on the board. He may have he came on early, so he might have left. So I just want to address something that he said from the very beginning, and I kind of think I know what he's talking about. He says winters just keep getting worse and worse. Okay, I would just point out gently that we are still in the month of November. We have not even entered December. Okay, that happens at the end of this week, and even in some of the most active winters that you'll find, many of them, if you go back and look, didn't do a thing until maybe after December 20th. Okay, and in some instances, you didn't see much until mid-January on. That the entire first half of the winter was basically a non-event. Maybe a couple of small events here and there, but you certainly can't draw any conclusions now. We have actually had, by the way, I did a quick run of statistics last night, just a couple, and I just wanted to see. Temperatures for the month of November around the New York City area are averaging near or a little bit below average, believe it or not. New York City, right, not counting today or yesterday for that matter, temperatures were running almost 1.8 degrees below average for the whole month. Newark was a little more than a degree below, and out on Long Island it was just about normal for Iceland. So, I mean, we're having a normal, this is an average November. There's nothing here that is, if you think that this November was a warm month, no, not at all. This was an average to below average month, and even with tomorrow going up to 60 in some places. I just don't understand where this perception, how this perception has started by that a lot of people have. It's almost delusional to think that, somehow when you hit the calendar hits November 1st, that you're supposed to see snow every single day and temperatures are not supposed to get above 30. I mean, that's ridiculous. So let's get this nonsense out of the way and just, stop it already. This is not how meteorology works. Winters that are cold from beginning to end are extremely rare. They always have volatility. And frankly, by the way, volatility is, if you're a winter weather lover, you probably would rather see the volatility than anything else, because it's out of volatility that breeds storms. We saw that last year several times in the East, in spite of the warm temperatures and record highs that occurred ahead of 3 major snowstorms. So, volatility is not a bad thing from that respect. It will be what it will be. And also, the other thing I would point out is if you think, the last 2 winters really were not that bad, considering the fact that I lived through, 96 through 2000, where we had 4 consecutive winters with less than a dozen inches of snow in each of those winters. And the snowfalls were running 70 to 80% below average over many areas of the Northeast for 4 years in a row, okay? And 24 of the 30 years between 1970 and 2000 in New York produced below average snowfall. So, you know, just stop it when you keep saying that winters are getting worse and worse. You know, that's ridiculous. If anything, it's been the other way around. So, I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox now. Well, here's a different question. We've got Rochelle Fingal asking, when is Missouri going to get a good snowfall and really cold? Well, if this block sets up like the GFS shows today, Rochelle, you're going to get into some of that colder air in the Show Me State, and I'm going to get to Missouri one of these days. Okay, so I think that's how you say it. It's Missouri, not Missouri. But welcome aboard. I think you may be my first Missourian to be on my YouTube channel. Thank you for being here. Hi to Robert Early. Hi to Dio. Hi to James. Okay, so Rochelle, what does the dark blue on the upper air maps? The dark blue represents basically represents lower than average pressures in the upper atmosphere, which we measure by height, how high you have to go in the atmosphere to achieve a certain equal pressure of a pressure reading of 500 millibars. So where you see the blue on those upper air maps, those would be lower heights or lower pressures. Where you see the orange and browns would be higher heights or higher pressures. On the surface maps, the bluish area is snow, the green is rain. Okay. So yeah, so, right. The dark blue, the darker the blue, the colder the air. Is the best thing, is the way to look at it on the upper air maps. Yes, Jason. December 2013 started warm, and then January through March close to 9 degrees below normal. And I would point out, yes, winter of 14-15. It didn't even get started, in my view, didn't really get started till the middle of January. The first December through the first half of January was almost a non-event. I could even remember at the very beginning of the month of January feeling depressed because we hadn't seen hardly anything, and there was a weak front that came through and produced a quick inch of snow. It was the first inch of snow at the beginning of the month. And it was almost a sense of relief that I felt, and of course, not knowing what was coming, you know, 2 weeks down the road with the famous half blizzard, and then the really cold weather that was with us for one of the coldest Februarys we've had in this area, and then that continued through much of the month of March. So you know, it's a long time, and we got a long way to go. I am certain, you know, if we were at the beginning of February right now, yeah, then the clock would be ticking, clearly, okay? But we're not even at the, you know, we still haven't gotten to December 1st. So let's breathe here. You want that block, who's asking, Dark Knight, if you want that block as strong as possible to force that upper low vortex as far south as possible so that you could get snow in Alabama, okay? So that's what you want. So you should be liking this run of the GFS, and we got a ways to go, Cliff Newton, for a white Christmas. So plenty of time to get there. But you know, let's you know, we're getting, every day we're a day closer. One of the things that at least, you know, I'm from the standpoint of cold and snow, we are, you know, we're not pushing it a day ahead every day. When the middle part of next week, it seems like that's going to be the let's call it the flip day, and that is holding for the last few days. So we're not pushing it further and further in the future. So as each model run stays with that idea around the middle part of next week and beyond, we're getting closer and closer. And as we do that, then we could start thinking about, is there going to be some kind of development? Is there a, you know, are those teleconnection indices pointing to perhaps something developing around, say, December 9th through the 11th? We'll see. Howard Vanderhoff, the snow weenies are impatient. My God, the snow weenies get impatient in September. okay? And then they still want it in May. So, yeah, they're always impatient. They're going to have to learn patience. Adam Fitz, didn't that happen earlier this year? Okay, I'm sorry, Adam. I'm not sure. I guess I got to trail back on the conversation to find the prior part of that thread. By the way, it's entirely possible. Not only we were talking about the fact, I mentioned the fact that it could wind up being cold and dry. I mean, there's no guarantee that any of this is going to happen in terms of any kind of snow to come out of this. It could be a cold dry pattern that sets up for weeks on end. That certainly wouldn't be the first time. I also would point out as well that perhaps if we get very deep into some sort of colder pattern, that the snow events you might see might be smaller ones as opposed to large scale events. But that's all for speculation. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. So we'll we're going to do a lot of that, thinking out loud over the coming winter season. Corey Bodziak, you need some more exciting weather. I'll say, it's been, this is very quiet for this time of year. It really is. Not just here. I mean, it's one thing when it's quiet over one part of the country, but when you look at the whole map of the United States and you see one strip of clouds that's maybe about 50 miles wide, that runs from the Great Lakes down to about North Texas, and that's it. And it's clear on either side. And then you've got some rain in the Pacific Northwest, and that's it. West of the Rockies. I mean, that's as calm and quiet as it gets. And the fact that we're having a number of days in a row, I mean, it's really like, it's putting me to sleep. I really want things to start moving here. But Lidl Griffin, you make a very good point. The strength of the block. If the block is too strong, it will suppress everything to the south. So whoever it was that asked about Alabama, you want that block to be so strong that it suppresses everything far to the south, and then you would see some early snows across the Mid-Atlantic and the southern Mid-Atlantic states in particular, and then maybe even down into the deep south. But you got to get that block. It's got to be really, really strong to force all the cold air further south, certainly for this time of year. But the models are certainly signaling. The GFS is really very, very impressive with how it wants to develop this block. The European has been going back and forth on the idea of whether it's going to be a strong block or a weaker block. So, all of that is very critical in how we, where we go with the forecast. And of course that the block in and of itself has been such a challenge. It's certainly been a challenge for the models, and I honestly believe that the indices being pushed to an extreme reading is having an impact on how models are handling all this, and that's why you keep seeing all this volatility. Tom Adams, man-made gases increasing the west-to-east jet stream? No. No. Decreasing the opportunities for cold air in the northeast? No. Okay. There's no, I've never seen any evidence of that. Okay. I look at maps and I see what's going on. There's nothing here in my 40 years that's really that different from what it was 40 years ago. As far as my experience has been, there's no change. Things are cyclical and they fluctuate back and forth. Weather is volatility. I think human nature romanticizes the seasons to be a certain way, sort of this smooth, journey through a winter season or a spring season. Apparently all springs are beautiful according to most people, and that's nonsense. And apparently all falls are cold, and that's nonsense. And the fact that all winters are cold and snowy from beginning to end is utter nonsense. So, do you get winters like that? Sure. But if you go back and look at records, you'll find that there are fewer of those and more of the ones that show volatility back and forth. monster low through the southern half of the UK. Jason Smith next weekend if the block breaks down. Tough call. Anything out further than 72 hours. Jason, correct. And I think, you know, for you, with regards to the UK and the block, the east space block, is the fact that the models are shifting the block westward. When that happens, assuming it happens, that is the point where you're going to start to see storms break through the block and move northeastward toward as you pointed out, the southern half of the UK, and the models are showing a rather monster low. The block is not going to break down between now and a week from today. The process of it breaking down and moving and building westward probably begins around this time next week, and then begins to shift westward. So everything obviously connected. When your block breaks, when your side of the block breaks down, our side of the block is going to be strengthening. Okay, folks, it's been great tonight. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Thanks for being here. Just want to mention real quick, by the way, that my cat now is not doing well. Those of you who are big Kovu fans, his diabetes is out of control, and we're having a bit of a difficult time with him. So I will let you know what happens with regards to his health. But right now he's not doing too well. So I just want to let you know you're not going to see him until maybe Saturday, maybe the first day that I get to do this from home. So until then, it's going to be a little tough. Now, I won't be broadcasting, just so you know. Tomorrow, I will not be able to do a 6 o'clock like we've been doing. I will, depending on how tired I am, I think I should be able to. I will probably do something tomorrow evening, let's say between 10:30 and 11 p.m. Eastern time. So it's going to be a bit late, and I can't promise it 100%. But if I do one tomorrow night, it will be between 10:30 and 11. If I miss that, then I will do it first thing Thursday morning, probably at around, say, 8 or 9 o'clock. I'll do a live stream Thursday morning and then do another one Thursday evening. So, I have a talk tomorrow. For those of you in Westchester County, I'll be at the town of Elmsford Village Hall at 7 o'clock on Wednesday till 8:30. We'll be talking winter weather. We'll have a conversation about winter weather and weather forecasting. And by all means, if you are watching from Westchester County or nearby, get in the car and come over at 7 o'clock at Elmsford Town Hall in the town of Elmsford. And of course, you can check out latest website posts at meteorologistjoecioffi.com. Check out the Joe Stradamus store at joestradamus.com. So if you want to get something for Christmas for the weather geek in your life, could be a Joe Stradamus or Angry Ben Christmas mug or both. And you can use the Joe Stradamus code, by the way. If you type in the code, you might get a discount out of it, so 20%. So just go ahead and give it a whirl. Don't feel any obligation, folks. I just put it out there. Thanks to those of you that have hit the super chat over time. I really, really appreciate it. And we'll see you. We'll see you, if not late tomorrow, certainly first thing Thursday morning. So keep your fingers crossed that I don't get home too tired, and I'll do a broadcast tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Take care.